Hello everyone, I'm Roopna Ravindran, Assistant Professor of English, Government Degree College, Jayawala. So today let's discuss Banaras, the prose written by Aldous Huxley. The writer was born in 1894 and he died in 1963. He was born in Surrey. He was a son of the editor of influential Cornhill magazine. His mother was the niece of the legendary writer Matthew Arnold. He was widely acknowledged as a preeminent intellectual. Many of his novels were very famous. Some of them to mention are Brave New World, published in 1932, then Chrome Yellow, published in 1921, Antique Hay, published in 1923, Those Barren Leaves, published in 1925, and Point Counterpoint, published in 1928. Huxley was interested about Hindu philosophy and mysticism. So this viewpoint can be seen in the novel Eyeless in Gaza, published in 1936. Through his novels and essays, the writer functioned as a critic of social norms. He was a humanist. So, in this essay, Banaras, Huxley describes the spectacle that he has witnessed in Banaras. Banaras is the present Varanasi. So, on that day, solar eclipse was going to happen, and Huxley had come to the Ghats of Banaras to observe the solar eclipse. He is trying to reflect upon the mankind's irrationality. His conclusion is that animals, though they lack intelligence, often behave more sensibly than human beings. But the sight that had seen on the banks of Ganges made him think a lot and make him shun on the superstitions that was then existent in India. In the essay, he advises Indians of all the religious persuasions and he asks them not to waste much time on superstitions. So, let's read this essay and then understand. It was said that the eclipse of the sun will be visible from Benares, but it needed more than smoked glass to see it. The eye of faith was also indispensable. That, alas, we did not possess. Partial to the point of being non existent, the eclipse remained, for us at least, unseen. For it was not to look at the moon silhouette that we had rowed out that morning on the Ganges, it was to look at the Hindus looking at it. The spectacle was vastly more extraordinary. So he is a rational individual. So he knows the scientific reason behind the solar eclipse. And then he has come there to view how Hindus looked at solar eclipse. So it was pre-independent India, and most of the Hindus believed that a huge serpent came and then swallowed the sun. So that was the belief they had during that time. So they were very much worried if the sun will appear the next day. And so they have assembled there on the banks of Ganges so they can pray to the god, they can take a holy bath in the sacred river and then pray to the god so that the sun comes back tomorrow, the next day. So everyone knew that the solar eclipse was visible from Benares, and he was mentioning that people needed more than smoked glass to see it. Usually, we observe lunar and solar eclipse with the help of smoked glass, but here people needed an eye of faith to see the eclipse. So that actually the writer did not possess because he is a rational person and he believes in scientific thoughts. So he did not possess the eye of faith. Let's move on to the next paragraph. They were at the lowest estimate a million of them on the bathing guards that morning. A million. All the previous night and day, they had been streaming into the town. We had met them on every road, trudging with bare feet through the dust, an endless and silent procession. In bundles balanced on their heads, they carried provisions and cooking utensils and dried dung for fuel, with the new clothes which it is incumbent on pious Hindus to put on after their bath in honor of the eclipsed sun. So millions of Hindus have come there. They have been coming in a row, bare feet through the dust, and they were very silent because they were anxious about the happenings. They were very much worried what will happen to the sun. So they have come with a lot of bundles. They have come with provisions, cooking utensils, fuel, and everything, and they are all well prepared to pray to the God and then rescue the son. Many had come far. The old men leaned wearily on their bamboo staves, their children astride on their hips, the burden on their heads automatically balanced. The women walked in a trance of fatigue. So many people are there of all age groups. We can find old men, we can find children astride on their hips of their mothers. The mothers have taken them on their hips and they have come, they have balanced the burden of the bundles on their head with their kids on the hips. So women walked as if they are in a trance of fatigue. They are very much tired because they have been traveling for a very long time. Here and there, we would see a little troop that had sat down to rest casually, as is the way of Indians in the dust of the road and almost under the wheels of passing vehicles. So while coming, even Aldous Huxley has observed a lot of people sitting here and there on the dust of the road, and they were sitting on the roadside. All these appeared very strange to the writer, and now the day and the hour had come. The serpent was about to swallow the sun. It was about to swallow him in Sumatra at any rate. At Benares, it would do no more than nibble imperceptibly at the edge of the disk. The serpent, one should say, was going to try to swallow the sun. A million of men and women had come together at Benares to assess the light of heaven against his enemy. So the eclipse was going to take place at Sumatra. It was about to swallow him. He has used symbolic representation. So he says that in Sumatra, the sun will not appear, and at Benares, the snake would actually nibble, would just bite it and not swallow it completely. So there are a lot of people, a lot of men and women who have come to Banaras and they wanted to rescue the sun from the serpent. The guards go down in furlong wide flights of steps to the river, which lies like a long arena at the foot of enormous tiers of seeds. So, if we observe, you can find a lot of steps which we have to get down and then go to the river. The tires were thronged today, floating on the Ganges. We looked up at acres upon of humanity. All those paths, the steps, and everything were full of people today. And floating on the Ganges, we looked up at acres upon acres of humanity. So we can see huge crowd over there. On the smaller and comparatively unsacred guards, the crowd was a little less densely packed than on the holiest steps. So he is observing the place. He says that on the smaller and comparatively unsacred guards, a little far away place from there, is not that densely packed, but they are all crowded at one place where they consider river very holy, and they just want to go and take a dip in the river so that they will be pure after the bath. It was at one of those less crowded ghats that we witnessed the embarkation on the sacred river of the princess. Canopied and curtained with glittering cloth of gold, a palanquin came staggering down through the crowd on the shoulders of six red liveried attendants. So there is no division of the social status also. Even the princess has come there to take a holy bath. She has come in a palanquin. The palanquin is carried by her attendants, and they have come and they have kept the palanquin down so that she can step out of that and take a holy bath in the sacred river of Ganges. A great barge like a Noah's ship, its windows hung with scarlet curtains, floated at the water's edge. So the palanquin looks royal, and the writer is comparing the palanquin to Noah's Ark. You might have heard about Noah's Ark mentioned in the Bible. So it is a massive ship that was built. Upon God's command, and that is the ship which saved Noah, his family, and others from the huge global flood that had taken place 4,300 years ago. So her palanquin looks just like a Noah's ship because her royal identity saves her from the crowd. So people are all moving up, moving to a distance and then giving her way so that she can just go and take a bath in the river Ganges. The major domo shouted and shoved and hit out with his rod of office. A way was somehow cleared. So the main person, the main attendant, that is the major domo, shouted and then made way for her so that she can be away from the crowd. Slowly and with frightful lurchings, the palanquin descended. So people, the attendants are very much careful, and with a gentle shake, that is lurching, the palanquin descended onto the ground. It was set down, and the twinkling of an eye, a little passageway of canvas had been erected between the litter and the door of the barge. So the Ganga River is considered sacred, but then the river is not very clean also. So there are a lot of litter on the banks of river Ganga, and this palanquin descended, and beside that one can observe litter, waste also. So it looks like a contradiction. There was a heaving of the cloth of gold, a flapping of the canvas. The ladies, for there were several of them in the litter, had entered the barge unobserved of an vulgar eye, which did not prevent them a few minutes later, when the barge had pushed out into the midstream, from lifting the scarlet curtain and peering out with naked faces and unabashed curiosity at the passing boats and our inquisitive camera. Poor princess. So she just um, uh, stepped out of the palanquin, but she couldn't take bath with the common people. They could not bath with their plebeian and unimprisoned sisters in the open Ganges. So what people covered them so they can go and take a royal dip in the Ganges. Their dip was to be in the bath's built water. The sacred stream is filthy enough under the sky. What must it be like after stagnating in darkness at the bottom of the ancient barge? So the river, the water is not clean at all. It looks filthy. It looks very dirty. And how does this princess go and take bath in that water, which looks like a stagnating in darkness, which doesn't have a flow, which is just still and is dark, is dirty as well. We rode on towards the burning guards, stretched out on their neat little oblong piers. two or three corpses were smoldering. So he observed that there were dead bodies on another side of the guards. Those corpses were burning. The cremation was also going on at one side of the banks of Ganga River. They lay on burning fagots. They were covered by them. Gruesomely and grotesquely, their feet projected like the feet of those who sleep uneasily on a bed too short under exiguous blankets. So he observed that the feet of the dead bodies were outside the pyre. They were burning, and that looked like fagots, like meat balls, dead bodies. A little further on, we saw a row of holy men sitting like cormorants on the narrow ledge on masonry just above the water. Cross legged, their hands dropped limply, palm upwards on the ground beside them. They contemplated the brown and sweating tips of their noses. The noise of an assembled million filled the air, but no sound could break the meditative sleep of the nose gazers. So he also observed that there were a lot of people, lot of saints sitting there and then meditating. They were cross-legged. They were sitting cross-legged. Their hands were dropped limply, their palm upwards, and then they were contemplating. They were meditating. At a given moment, the eye of faith must have observed the nibblings of the demonical serpent. For suddenly and simultaneously, all those on the lower steps of the guards threw themselves into the water and began to wash and gargle. So the people noticed that the serpent started nibbling the sun, biting the sun. So what they did, they went and threw themselves into the water so that after the solar eclipse, they can take a holy bath and all their impurities will wash off. That is their superstitious belief. So they are just going and jumping into the water. A numerous band of police abbreviated the devotion and their bath in the interest of the crowds. There are a lot of policemen over there, and they shortened the devotion. They just asked people to quickly finish their bath and then go off from there, because lot of people are waiting to take a holy dip in the river. So, in order to ease the traffic, policemen are also there, abbreviating the prayers of the Hindus. The front of the waiting crew was 1,000 yards wide, but a million people were waiting. The bathing must have gone on uninterruptedly the whole day. So these people, the police people were there. They were managing the crowd. Otherwise, the bathing might have gone uninterruptedly without any disturbance for the whole day. Time passed. The serpent went on nibbling imperceptibly at the sun. So he says that the serpent is very cool and slowly he is eating the sun. Time passed on like that. The Hindus counted their beads and prayed, made ritual gestures, ducked under the sacred slime, drank, and were moved on by the police to make room for another installment of the patient million. So Hindus were all looking very pious. They were praying. They were doing all kinds of gestures, ritual gestures, and they drank that water. And Aldous Huxley and his accompaniants were just taking snap shots. West is west. That is what he is saying. The people in the east are showing all these kinds of superstitious actions, but west is west. We know the scientific thoughts. So we are just taking snapshots and we are observing the actions of the people here. In spite of the serpent, the sun was uncommonly hard on our backs, and after a couple of hours on the river, we decided that we had had enough and landed. Though the rays of the sun were very strong that day, so he could not bear the heat. And then they decided, his group decided that they had had enough of the sight, and they just went back from the place. The narrow lanes that lead from the guards to the open streets in the center of the town were lined with beggars, more or less holy. They sat on the ground with their begging bowls before them. So when they come out of those narrow streets to the open streets, they could observe lot of beggars sitting there with their bowls, and they were waiting for these people to give them some offering. The charitable, as they passed, would throw a few grains of rice into each of the bowls, as you have observed near the temples and all. People who have completed their prayers, when they are coming out and then giving them a few grains of rice in their bowls. By the end of the day, the beggars might, with luck, have accumulated a square meal. We pushed our way slowly through the thronged alleys. From an archway in front of us emerged a sacred bull. So when they were just coming out, they noticed a sacred bull over there. The nearest beggar was dozing at his post. Those who eat little sleep much. The bull lowered its muzzle to the sleeping man's bowl, made a scoring movement with its back tongue, and a morning charity had gone. So, what did the bull do? It just came and ate the rice that was there in the bowl of the beggar. The beggar was still sleeping. The beggar still dozed, thoughtfully chewing. The Hindu totem turned back the way it had come and disappeared. So the bull just had the food, and then it disappeared from the place. The beggar did not notice that he was just sleeping. Being stupid and having no imagination, animals often behave far sensibly than men. So he's making a very important remark here. Animals look more sensible than human beings, so because they at least get their food at the right moment, efficiently and by instinct. They do the right appropriate thing at the right moment. Eat when they are hungry, look for water when they are thirsty, make love in the mating season, rest and play when they have leisure. So all these are done on time. But then men are intelligent and imaginative. They look backwards and ahead. They invent ingenious explanations for observed phenomena. They devise elaborate and roundabout means for the achievement of remote ends. Their intelligence, which has made them masters of the world, often causes them to act like imbeciles. But what is happening here? Human beings who are actually intelligent are wasting time on superstitions. They are not getting food to eat, they are not eating, they are fasting and spending time on superstitions. No animal, for example, is clever and imaginative enough to suppose that an eclipse is the work of a serpent devouring the sun. So um animals do not know that it is the work of a serpent devouring the sun, so they are least bothered. That is the sort of explanation that could occur only to the human mind. So these kinds of crazy explanations comes only for human beings, and only the human mind would dream of making ritual gestures in the hope of influencing for his own benefit the outside world, while the animal, obedient to its instinct, goes quietly about its business. Man, being endowed with reason and imagination, wastes half his time and energy in doing things that are completely idiotic. So animals are obedient to their instinct, but man, who actually has reason and imagination, are wasting time. Men are wasting time and energy in doing things that are idiotic. In time, it is true, experience teaches him that magic formulas and ceremonial gestures do not give him what he wants. But until experience has taught him, and he takes a surprising long time to learn, man's behavior is in many respects far sillier than that of animals. So, human beings have to learn from their experience that these ceremonial gestures and magical formulas will not help them at all. But then, for that, they need to have a lot of experience and man's behavior is very much silly when compared to that of animals. So I reflected as I watched the sacred bull lick up the rice from the dozing beggar's bowl. When a million people undertake long journeys, suffer fatigue, hunger, and discomfort in order to perform in a certain stretch of dirty water, certain antiques for the benefit of a fixed star 90 million miles away, the bull goes about looking for food and fills its belly with what it can find. In this, it is obvious the bull's brainlessness causes it to act much more rationally than its masters. So, who is more sensible here? Who is more rational here? Animal is rational. The bull looks rational, but then human beings are looking very stupid. To save the sun, which might one feels very safely be left to look after itself, a million of Hindus will assemble on the banks of the Ganges. So sun is independent, sun can look after itself, but then how many millions of Hindus have assembled in that place to rescue it? How many, I wonder, would assemble to save India? So during that time, India didn't even get independence. So how many of you will assemble to save India? That is the question raised by the author. An immense energy, which, if it could be turned into political channels, might liberate and transform the country. Is wasted in the name of imbecile superstitions. So, a lot of productive energy is wasted on these kinds of foolishness. Religion is luxury which India in its present condition cannot possibly afford. So India is a developing country, so it cannot afford these kinds of luxuries of superstitions. India will never be free until the Hindus and Muslims are as rabidly enthusiastic about their religion as we are about the Church of England. So India will become free only if people are enthusiastic about the country and not about their religion. If I were an Indian millionaire, I would leave all my money for the endowment of an atheist mission. So he thinks that the necessity of the country is an atheist mission and not these kinds of religious superstitions that will not take people anywhere. So, briefly speaking, through this essay, Huxley tells the reader that one should be patriotic and enthusiastic in building one's country rather than being a religious fanatic. So, Huxley feels that Hindus and Muslims of India should work together for the development of the country. So I'll give the link of the website in the comments. You can go to the website. That is a website created by me. You can go there and then read this lesson on your own. Thank you.